My name is Caleb. I'm 28, and I make my home in a quiet neighborhood in Tacoma, Washington. The city has its own pulse, but my corner of it is serene. I occupy a small second-story apartment overlooking a rain-soaked street, and my career is as a junior architect for a boutique firm in Seattle. I spend my days drafting additions for luxury homes, refining blueprints for kitchens I could never afford, and designing elegant spaces for people whose lives are nothing like mine. It's not the creative work I dreamed of in school, but it covers my rent and keeps my mind sharp. I've always been a quiet observer, more comfortable listening than speaking. Meaningful relationships have been elusive for me. I suppose I always held a passive belief that love would find me when the time was right, but the time never seemed to arrive. Most of my days followed a predictable, rigid pattern. I'd catch the early commuter train to Seattle, walk the 6 blocks to the office, and lose myself in the precise lines of AutoCAD. My boss, Arthur Sterling, was a man carved from granite and ambition. He was a legend in the local architectural scene, known for his stark, modernist designs and an equally severe personality. He rarely spoke to me directly, preferring to communicate through a senior partner. I was a cog in his well-oiled machine, and that was the extent of our relationship. I knew he lived in a sprawling, glass-walled mansion in Bellevue with his wife, a woman I had never met and couldn't even picture. I was just another employee, easily overlooked. Then, one Thursday afternoon, everything shifted. Sterling was out of the country for a conference, and an urgent issue arose with the blueprints for his own home renovation. A subcontractor had found a discrepancy in the load-bearing calculations for a new cantilevered deck. I was the one who had drafted that section, so I was dispatched to the Sterling residence to take new measurements and verify the plans on site. The senior partner handed me a keycard. He said his wife, Isabel, would be home, but to let yourself in if she doesn't answer. The office is on the 2nd floor. Be quick, be invisible. That was the directive. I drove my beat-up sedan through the manicured gates of Bellevue's most exclusive enclave, feeling profoundly out of place. The Sterling house wasn't a home, it was a statement. A fortress of glass, steel, and dark cedar perched on a hill overlooking Lake Washington. I let myself in through a side door as instructed. The interior was cavernous and cold, filled with abstract art and furniture that looked beautiful but deeply uncomfortable. I called out, "Hello, Mrs. Sterling." But only the echo of my own voice answered. Following the directions, I made my way up a floating steel staircase to the 2nd floor, my worn work boots silent on the polished concrete. The office was supposed to be the last door on the left. I pulled out my tablet, ready to get to work, and pushed the door open. It wasn't the office. It was a massive dressing room lined with wardrobes of dark wood. And standing in the middle of the room, her back to me, was a woman wrapped in nothing but a white silk robe, loosely tied at the waist. She was staring at her reflection in a floor-to-ceiling mirror, but her gaze was distant, unfocused. She didn't startle when the door opened. She simply met my eyes in the reflection, her expression unreadable. I froze, my mind a blank slate of panic and apology. "I'm so sorry, I was looking for the—" I stammered, already backing away. She didn't turn around. She just watched me in the mirror, a flicker of something, not anger, not embarrassment, in her pale blue eyes. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "Close the door behind you." I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. The request was so unexpected, so contrary to every social instinct I possessed, that it short-circuited my brain. She finally turned from the mirror to face me directly. Her blonde hair was damp and fell around her shoulders, and her face was bare, stripped of any pretense. She looked tired. "Please," she added, her voice softer this time. "I don't want the housekeeper to see." I did as she asked, stepping fully into the room and clicking the heavy door shut. The sound echoed in the sudden, intense silence. I felt like I had crossed some invisible, irrevocable line. "The office is next door," she said, gesturing vaguely with one hand. She still hadn't made any move to tighten her robe or cover up. It was as if her state of undress was the least important thing in the room. "Arthur's instructions are never as clear as he thinks they are." I swallowed hard, trying to regain my composure. "I'm Caleb, from the firm. I'm here to check some measurements for the deck." She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I know who you are. The new draftsman. The quiet one." I could feel the heat rising in my neck. She knew who I was? I was certain I was just a name on a payroll sheet. "I saw you at the holiday party," she clarified, as if reading my thoughts. "You spent the whole night by the windows, just watching everyone." I felt a strange mix of embarrassment and fascination. She saw me. In a room full of powerful, boisterous people, she had noticed the quiet guy in the corner. An awkward silence fell between us. I was intensely aware of the intimacy of the space, the scent of her perfume, the soft light, the sheer vulnerability of the moment. I should have been focused on getting out of there, but I was captivated by the deep melancholy in her eyes. "Are you all right, Mrs. Sterling?" I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Isabel," she corrected me gently. "And no, I don't think I am, but thank you for asking." She walked over to a velvet ottoman and sat down, the silk of her robe parting, slightly to reveal her knee. "He bought me a new car for our anniversary," she said, her voice detached, as if she were reciting a story about a stranger. "A silver Porsche. He left the keys on the counter this morning before he flew to Berlin. He didn't even say goodbye." She looked up at me then, and her gaze was so direct, so full of a loneliness that I recognized in myself, that it knocked the air from my lungs. "He thinks things can fix people." I stood there, a technician in a palace, holding a tablet full of numbers that suddenly felt meaningless. I didn't know what to do with her confession, but I knew it was a fragile, precious thing. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a background character. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, but I was certain of one thing. That afternoon, when she looked at me and chose not to hide, was the first moment I felt a genuine human connection in that world of glass and steel. That night, sleep was impossible. Not from stress or anxiety, but because my thoughts kept replaying those few minutes in her dressing room. The low timbre of her voice, the profound sadness in her eyes, that flicker of defiance when she told me to close the door. I think that's where it began. It wasn't love, not then, but a profound curiosity had been unlocked inside me. For the first time, I wanted to know more about the world I was helping to build, and about the woman living so unhappily within it. The days following that encounter at the Sterling house were a study in tension. Every time I had to communicate about the project, every email I sent that might cross Arthur's desk, I felt a jolt of anxiety. I had to go back to the house twice more for follow-up inspections. The first time, Isabel was nowhere to be seen. The housekeeper let me in, and I went about my work with a knot in my stomach, half hoping and half dreading I would run into her. The house felt empty and even colder than before. The second time, she was there. I was on the unfinished deck, taking laser measurements, when she came out through the sliding glass doors, holding 2 mugs. She was dressed in simple jeans and a soft grey sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked younger, more approachable. "Figured you could use this," she said, handing me one of the mugs. It was black coffee, no sugar. "Just a guess." I took it, my fingers brushing against hers. A tiny spark of electricity shot up my arm. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice sounding rough. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the grey expanse of the lake. "How's it coming along?" she asked, her tone casual, as if we were old friends discussing a garden. "It's good," I replied, trying to sound professional. "The structural supports are solid. We just needed to adjust the beam placements." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't really interested in the technical details. We stood in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, filled with the things we couldn't say. Slowly, cautiously, I got braver. I started to ask her questions that weren't about architecture. One afternoon, I saw a large, unfinished canvas propped up in a corner of the living room, covered by a sheet. "Do you paint?" I asked. She looked over at it, a flicker of something. Pride, then sadness, crossing her face. "I used to, before all this." She gestured at the opulent house around her. "Arthur says it's a messy hobby. He prefers art you can buy, not art you have to make." I was quiet for a second. Then I said, "I'd love to see it sometime." She gave me a small, guarded smile. "Maybe." That maybe hung in the air between us for the rest of the day. Over the next few weeks, our brief, stolen conversations became the focal point of my life. I'd find reasons to be at the house, a site query, a consultation with the electrician. And we'd talk about nothing and everything. Her favorite authors, my strange college projects, how she once spent a year in Florence and felt more at home there than she ever did here. She told her stories with an easy grace, as if she was starved for a willing ear. And the more I listened, the more I understood the crushing weight she lived under. She never explicitly complained about her husband, but the criticism was there in the spaces between her words. You could see it in the way her shoulders tensed whenever his car pulled into the driveway. She wasn't broken, just worn down, tired of being an accessory in her own life. I never tried to be her savior. I wasn't in a position to fix anything. But I showed up, and I listened. Sometimes I'd bring her a pastry from a small bakery near my apartment in Tacoma. "I remember you said you missed real bakeries," I'd say. She would accept it with a look of quiet gratitude that was more meaningful than any words. Then one evening, it was different. I was packing up my gear after a late inspection. The sun had set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the lawn. I saw her walking by the pool, her arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. I hesitated. Then I walked over to her. "Hey," I said softly. She turned, a little startled. "Caleb, I thought you'd left." I smiled. "Just finishing up." She held her phone loosely, like she wasn't in a rush to be anywhere. "Do you want to walk for a bit?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't feel like going back inside just yet." I didn't have to think. "Yeah, of course." We walked along the stone path that wound through her immaculate garden. The only sounds our footsteps on the gravel. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, she pointed to a small, secluded bench hidden behind a cluster of birch trees. "That's my spot," she said. "When I need to feel like I'm not in his house, I come here." I glanced at her, wondering how deep the chasm between them ran. "Does he ever join you?" I asked gently. She didn't answer right. Away. "Arthur doesn't sit still," she said finally. "He sees stillness as a weakness, a lack of ambition." We kept walking. Eventually we circled back, and she sat down on the bench under the soft glow of a garden light. I sat beside her, leaving a respectable distance between us. She pulled a small, sleek thermos from the pocket of her coat. "Want some tea? It's probably lukewarm." I nodded. "Sure." We drank in silence, listening to the wind rustling the leaves. Then, very quietly, she said, "You're different." "Different how?" I asked. You don't look at me like I'm a prize or a problem. You just see me. I don't think anyone has done that in a very long time. My heart was pounding in my chest, not with a cinematic swell of romance, but with a terrifying awareness that I was about to do something incredibly reckless. I turned toward her. She didn't look away. And before my rational mind could intervene, I asked, "What would you do if I kissed you right now?" There was a beat of silence, maybe half a second long, that felt like an eternity. Then a small, genuine smile graced her lips. She leaned in, not all the way, just enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath. "Find out," she whispered. So I did. It wasn't explosive. There was no soundtrack. It wasn't a movie scene. It was real and hesitant and deeply sad. Her lips were soft, but there was a sorrow in the kiss, a sense of profound transgression, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel this. When we pulled apart, she studied my face for a long time. I had no idea what to say. I just looked back at her. Finally, she breathed. "I haven't done that in years." "Me neither," I admitted. She stood up abruptly. "I should go inside." I nodded, my mind reeling. We didn't hug. We didn't make any promises. She just gave me a tired, warm smile and walked back towards the house, disappearing into the glare of the kitchen lights. I remained on that bench long after she was gone, wondering what had just happened, if it meant anything, and whether I had just made the biggest mistake or the best decision of my entire life. The morning after the kiss, I woke up long before my alarm, my chest feeling hollow and tight at the same time. I wondered if it meant something, if I had just destroyed my career for a moment of impossible connection. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling of dread pressing down on me. I actually dreaded getting out of bed. I showered in a rush, put on my most professional, anonymous-looking clothes, and drove to the office feeling like a man on his way to his own execution. At 10:15 a.m., I had a project meeting that included Arthur Sterling, who had returned from his trip. I walked into the conference room, my heart pounding. Isabel wouldn't be there, of course, but the entire atmosphere felt charged. Sterling was at the head of the table, looking sharp and severe. He didn't greet me, just gave a curt nod. The meeting was about a different project, but all I could think about was the house, the garden, the bench. I avoided making eye contact with him, focusing on my notes, my voice steady as I gave my updates. I was just an employee, invisible. Later that afternoon, an email came through from Isabel. The subject line was simply, "Deck furnishings." My stomach dropped. I opened it. The message was brief and cold. "Caleb, please forward the final deck dimensions and weight capacity specifications to our interior designer. Her contact information is attached. Please CC me on all future correspondence regarding the project. Thank you, Isabel Sterling." It was a dismissal, a wall being erected in real time. There was no warmth, no hint of the woman on the bench, just a formal, professional chill. Our fingers hadn't touched, but the effect was the same. She was pulling away, fast. I stood there for a second, staring at the screen, hoping for, I don't know what, a hidden message, an emoji, anything. There was nothing. I forwarded the information as requested, my heart sinking like a stone. All day I spun theories. Maybe Arthur was home and standing over her shoulder. Maybe she was just being careful. Maybe she was scared. But by the end of the day, a colder, harder truth began to settle in. She regretted it. I didn't want to accept it. That kiss had felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. It wasn't just physical. It was an honest, shared moment of loneliness. And I was sure she'd felt it too. But the tone of that email, that wasn't the tone of someone cherishing a connection. That was the tone of someone erasing evidence. I waited a day, then two. There were no more emails, no contrived reasons for me to visit the site. The project was moving into the hands of contractors and designers. My part was done. By the third day, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. It was a Friday evening. I knew Sterling often had late meetings on Fridays. I drove to Bellevue, not with a plan, but with a desperate need for some kind of resolution. I parked on a public street a block away from the house and just sat in my car, my heart racing. I composed and deleted a dozen texts. Finally, I just wrote, "Can we talk?" and sent it before I could lose my nerve. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then my phone buzzed. "Where are you?" I told her. Another minute passed. "The gate at the back of the garden will be unlocked in 5 minutes. Don't be seen." My stomach twisted with every step I took down the darkened street. I slipped through the gate and found her waiting for me by the same cluster of birch trees, her face pale in the moonlight. She had her arms crossed, her body language defensive. She didn't speak first, so I did. Did I do something wrong? She blinked, as if surprised by the directness of the question. "No, Caleb, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why are you shutting me out?" She let out a long, slow breath and looked down at the ground. "I'm not shutting you out," she said softly. "I'm protecting you." I frowned. "From what? From your husband?" She shook her head. "From what this could become." There was a long pause. "I liked the kiss," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "More than I should have, and that terrifies me." "Why?" I asked. "Because my life is a gilded cage, Caleb. I have everything and nothing. My husband is a powerful man. He's possessive. Not because he loves me, but because he sees me as one of his acquisitions. If he even suspected, he wouldn't just be angry. He would ruin you. He'd make sure you never worked in this city again." I looked down. I didn't know what to say. Every word I had rehearsed sounded naive and foolish now. She stepped closer. "When I said you're different, that's the most dangerous part. You're kind. You're decent. I'm not asking you to risk your future for me." I finally met her gaze. "I'm not asking for anything complicated. I like being with you." "That's exactly why I'm scared," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't angry or cold. It was heavy with the weight of an impossible situation. We both wanted to say more, but knew it wouldn't change the facts. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like defeat. "Okay, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it." She looked surprised, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "You're not going to argue?" I gave a weak, self-deprecating smile. "I've never been good at arguing, especially not when the stakes are this high." She smiled sadly. "You're a good man, Caleb." I stood up straight. "Yeah, that seems to be the problem." She stood too. "Be careful." "You too," I said. I gave her a small nod, then turned to leave. Before I reached the gate, she called out softly, "Wait." I looked back. "I'm not saying this is what I want," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm just saying this is how it has to be. For now." I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. Then I walked out into the night. I didn't sleep that night, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was the stark, bitter clarity of loss. I didn't feel rejected by her. I felt defeated by her circumstances. It was as if life had shown me a beautiful, intricate story, but had torn out the final pages. Over the next few days, I buried myself in work. I didn't want to go back to the office, but I had to. I had to see Arthur Sterling and pretend nothing had happened. I had to act like I wasn't carrying this massive, dangerous secret. I still thought about her every day. I'd see a woman with blonde hair on the street and my heart would leap. I'd drive past a billboard for Porsche and my stomach would clench. One night I typed out a long, heartfelt email, but didn't send it. The last line was all that mattered. "I'm still here if for now ever ends. I'm not going anywhere. I saved it in my drafts and closed my laptop. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the heartbreak. It's the waiting for a door that may never open. It had been 32 days since I last saw Isabel. I wasn't marking a calendar, but my body kept score. Every time Arthur Sterling walked past my desk, my shoulders would tense. Every time I saw a Bellevue address on a work order, my breath would catch. I hadn't received any communication from her since that night in the garden. I had honored her wish. Space. No texts, no probing emails, no accidental encounters. I had become the invisible man she needed me to be. But my thoughts were a constant looping reel of our stolen moments. The way she held her coffee mug with both hands, the faint scent of jasmine that clung to her clothes, the way her eyes, so often clouded with sorrow, would clear for a moment when she laughed at something I said. I missed her. More than that, I missed the feeling of being truly seen by someone who wasn't evaluating my worth or my ambition, but was just listening to the person I was. Then, on a Tuesday evening, the world tilted on its axis. I got home from work late, around 7:30, dropped my satchel on the floor, and was heating up some leftover curry when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? There was a pause, and then her voice, hesitant and small. Caleb. My heart stopped. I leaned against the counter for support. Isabel, is everything okay? No, she said, and her voice cracked. Nothing is okay. Can you meet me? She gave me the address of a small, quiet park in Kirkland, a neutral town between us. 20 minutes, I said, already grabbing my keys. The drive was a blur of anxiety. When I got to the park, I found her on a bench facing the water, huddled inside a coat that looked too big for her. I walked up slowly and sat down beside her. She was staring out at the dark water, her face illuminated by the distant lights of Seattle. A single, small suitcase sat at her feet. I left him, she said without preamble. I stared at her, then at the suitcase, the reality of her words slowly sinking in. Tonight. He came home. He'd been drinking. We had a fight. Not the first one, but this one was different. He said something. Something I can't unhear. She took a shaky breath. He told me he knew I was a sad, empty little thing when he married me, and that I should be grateful he gives my life any purpose at all. She turned to look at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. And I realized he was right. I am empty, because I've let him hollow me out for years. So I packed one bag, I got in my car, and I drove away. My heart ached for her. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there, a silent, steady presence beside her on the cold bench. After a long silence, she spoke again. I almost didn't call you. I looked over. Why did you? She sighed, a puff of white in the cold air. Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. I'm not asking for anything complicated. You were the only person I could think of who wouldn't try to fix this or manage it or tell me what to do. What do you need? I asked. I don't know, she whispered. A hotel for tonight, I guess. A lawyer tomorrow. A whole new life after that. She looked so lost, so overwhelmed. Isabel, I said, my voice firm but gentle. You have a place to stay. My apartment isn't much, but it's safe. It's warm. You can stay as long as you need. No questions, no expectations. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and relief. You would do that? Of course, I said. Let's get your bag. We drove back to my small apartment in Tacoma in silence. It felt surreal, having her in the passenger seat of my car, the glittering mansion of her past receding in the rear-view mirror. When we got to my place, I could see her taking in the worn-out couch, the stacks of books, the simple, unadorned life I lived. I made her some tea and gave her the only bedroom, taking the couch for myself. Before she closed the bedroom door, she paused. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." I just nodded. I hadn't realized how much weight I had been carrying until that exact moment when it lifted, just slightly. The next few days were a blur. She stayed in my apartment, a ghost moving through my small space. She barely ate, barely spoke. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers, her voice a low, tense murmur. I didn't push. I just made sure there was fresh coffee in the morning and food in the fridge. I went to work, came home, and we would coexist in a quiet, fragile truce. By the time Sunday came, she seemed a little less broken. I found her that afternoon, sketching in a notebook on my small balcony. I brought her a cup of tea. "It's probably lukewarm," I said, echoing her words from the garden. A small smile touched her lips. "I don't mind." For a minute, we just stood there, the quiet stretching between us like a warm blanket instead of a wall. Finally, she spoke. "He's freezing my accounts." I looked over. I knew he would. It's what he does. He controls things. She sighed. "My lawyer says this is going to be long and ugly." "We'll figure it out," I said, the "we" slipping out naturally. She looked out at the street. "You didn't sign up for this, for a messy divorce and a broke, terrified woman sleeping on your couch." "That's not what I see," I said honestly. "I see the woman who was brave enough to leave." She turned to me. "My car is in your parking spot, the Porsche. It's the only thing I have that's in my name. I should sell it." Another pause. She looked down at her notebook. "Do you still think about that night in the garden?" "All the time," I admitted. "And if I told you I'm not ready for anything, that I'm a complete mess, but I'm so glad you're here, would that be okay?" I turned to her. "Are we talking coffee slow or park bench slow?" She laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "Slower," she said. "We're talking one day at a time slow." I nodded. "Yeah, that's okay." We stood there until the sun dipped low behind the neighboring buildings. Not as two people rushing toward a future, but as two people quietly agreeing to face the present. This matters. When we finally went inside, she didn't retreat to the bedroom. She helped me make dinner. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel stuck in a holding pattern. I felt like we were moving, slowly and honestly, together. It's been 10 months since that day she showed up at the park. I remember every detail: her voice on the phone, the small suitcase at her feet, her eyes when she said, "Slower." That moment became our new beginning. Not a grand romance, not a passionate reunion, just a quiet promise to be present. We didn't rush. That was the most important part. No declarations, no pressure. She sold the car. It gave her enough money to rent her own small apartment a few blocks from mine and to retain her lawyer. The divorce was as ugly as she predicted. Arthur fought her on everything, not because he wanted her back, but because he couldn't stand the idea of losing. I watched her navigate it with a strength I hadn't known she possessed. I was her sounding board, her late-night tea maker, her silent support during tearful phone calls with her attorney. In early April, I helped her move her few belongings into her new place. It was tiny, with a kitchen that was smaller than her old closet, but it was hers. We spent a weekend painting the walls a warm, soft white. I saw her come alive in that space, making decisions for herself for the first time in years. She bought a huge canvas and started painting again, filling the small apartment with the smell of turpentine and the vibrant colors of her imagination. We started doing little things together, exploring Tacoma's waterfront, visiting museums on their free admission days, cooking dinners in her tiny kitchen. We never used the word relationship. Naming it too soon felt like it would make it fragile, like something her ex-husband's shadow could still break. She had her hard days. Sometimes the legal battle would wear her down, and she'd retreat into a shell of silence. Once I came over and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by legal documents, just staring into space. I thought my life was supposed to be a masterpiece, she said quietly. Instead, it's just this messy sketch. I didn't try to fix her pain. I just sat on the floor beside her until she was ready to talk. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the night I knew I was in love with her. Not the reckless, dramatic kind, but the quiet, earned kind. The kind that doesn't shout, but shows up day after day. In July, Arthur Sterling found out about us. I was called into the senior partner's office and let go. A conflict of interest, they called it. Reputational risk. I was blacklisted. Every firm in Seattle I applied to had mysteriously lost my resume or filled the position. It hit me hard, not just financially, but emotionally. I felt powerless, like I had nothing left to offer her. I stopped answering her calls for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she showed up at my door, stood in my entryway, and said, "Don't you dare disappear on me, Caleb. Not after everything." I told her I felt like a failure. She said, "Well, I felt like a failure for a decade, and yet here we are. Neither of us is broken. We're just rebuilding." She used some of her dwindling funds to help me pay my rent. She called an old friend from her university days, a woman who now ran a small, innovative design build firm in Portland. I got an interview. I got the job. It was a smaller company, less prestigious, but the work was more creative and the people were genuine. It was mine. By fall, we had found our rhythm. Her divorce was finalized. I moved to a new place in Portland. It was still my own apartment, but it was a 5-minute walk from hers. Some evenings I'd cook for her. Other nights we'd walk through the city, just looking at the architecture and pretending we were tourists. And somewhere between cheap takeout, shared bottles of wine, and late nights on her lumpy second-hand couch, Isabel started smiling differently. It wasn't the practiced, polished smile I'd first seen in her gilded cage. This smile was softer, realer. It was the smile of a woman who had let her guard down and found it was safe to do so. A month ago, I brought up the idea of living together, not with a grand gesture, just over a quiet breakfast at her place. She was spreading jam on a piece of toast. I said, "What would you think about maybe getting a place together? A real place?" She didn't answer right away. She just finished making the toast, set it on a plate, and sat down. Then she looked at me and said, "You're the first man I've ever felt safe with. So, yeah, let's find a place." We didn't make a big deal about it. We just started looking. We found a 1-bedroom apartment in an old brick building. It had high ceilings and a little kitchen with terrible green linoleum. But she loved the light. So I did too. Today is our first morning in our new home. Her paintings are on the walls. My books are on the shelves. Isabel is curled up on the couch in one of my sweatshirts, her feet tucked under her, sketching in her notebook. The whole apartment smells like coffee and fresh paint. I sit down beside her. She leans into me without a word. We don't need to say much anymore. We just know. After a while I say, "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" She smiles without looking up from her drawing. "I told you to close the door." She closes her notebook, turns her head towards me, and her eyes are soft and clear. "And you did." I grin. "I'm glad I did." She puts her hand on my cheek. "Me too, more than you know." I kiss her. It's different now. Not hesitant, not stolen, not sad. It's just right. When we pull away, she whispers, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being so patient with me." I shake my head. You were never broken, Isabel. I think I just needed someone to believe I was worth seeing. She holds my gaze, her thumb gently tracing my jawline. "You were. from the very start. That's how our story is. It didn't start with a fairy tale. It started in a moment of crisis, but we didn't rush it. We carried our scars and built something honest. We built a life like a home, brick by brick, breath by breath. And now, we live here.